G'day everybody, my name's Chris and this is Let's Walk. Today I wanted to talk about investing in property in Australia and where you might choose to buy your next or your first investment property. I'm going to talk you through two examples that I've had over the last sort of 15 years and just let you know how they have gone and why I wouldn't choose to invest in Victoria again. So about 15 years ago we bought our first investment property as part of our retirement plan in a regional town in Victoria, a large regional town with good growth. We bought that before COVID. It was a brand new house, 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom, and leading up to COVID it was doing really well. Great rental return, well over 5%, good tenant, always tenanted, good capital growth. Then during COVID it went nuts because everybody wanted to get out of the city. They wanted a tree change or a sea change, and a lot of people moved to this region where we had the house, and the capital growth in particular was crazy during that period. Around that time the Victorian government put in some protection for renters around breaking of lease and rent increases, and we thought that was fair enough. You want to be able to protect your renters, and what we had seen is that rent was going up a lot for people. To be honest, we didn't really put the rent up at our property that much. I think it's gone up around $70 since we bought it in about 15 years, so not the massive rent increases that you see at some properties. So during COVID, no problem as far as renters. Everybody wanted a rental property, so that was no dramas. And since COVID, same thing. We've had a rock solid tenant, always pays the rent on time, never been an issue. So that's been really, really good. The capital growth, as I said, during COVID was really good, but after COVID, it started to decline rapidly. I think if we'd have sold the house at the peak of COVID during that time when everybody wanted a property back then, we would have got about $150,000 more than we would get today. And there's a number of reasons for why that property value has slipped. First is that people didn't want to go to the country anymore once the pandemic was over. They were quite happy to stay in the city, and a lot of people had to return to the office, so they didn't want to commute those long journeys. So a lot of investment properties and a lot of properties went onto the market, flooded the market, prices started to come down, especially in regional areas. The second reason is because the Victorian government put themselves in so much debt through COVID and after COVID, from spending on infrastructure, etc., that they decided they were going to claw as much of that money back as they could from investors and hurt mum and dad investors like my wife and I. So the first thing they did is they expanded land tax. So if you have one investment property in Victoria, then you're now hit with a land tax. That land tax is I think around $950 as a lump payment, and then 1% of the value of your land on top of that. So for us it was around $1,500, say, roughly, as land tax on that property that we had to pay. So that was a new tax that came in January 2024. This year there's another new tax being introduced. It's the Fire and Emergency Services Volunteer Fund tax. That really was limited to commercial property, but now has been extended to investors. And that is going to be on our property nearly $2,900 or $2,900 per year. I listened to the Victorian Treasurer being asked why they decided to extend this to investors, and her answer was pretty straightforward. She said, we feel they are the group that can afford it, most likely to be able to afford it. Guess what? You're wrong. We can't, as mum and dad investors, cop $4,000 a year in new taxes in less than 2 years from this government. So what that has meant is that property prices have come down for all investors, but particularly in regional areas. And houses have become much, much harder to sell. Flies everywhere this morning, I don't know why. So, you know, we've got two options with this particular property. We can either put it on the market and it'll take 4 to 6 months to sell and we'll take unders for it, or we can hold on to it and hope that the market turns, which it does feel it is happening, and as interest rates come down there will be more opportunity for sales. But right at the moment we're sort of between a rock and a hard place with that property. We're probably leaning more towards selling it and reinvesting elsewhere than we are keeping it. And I think that's the problem the Victorian government's got at the moment. A lot of people are looking to do the same. On the flip side of that, we've got another investment property that we bought about 2 years after the Victorian one. That's in Queensland. That's about 25 kilometres south of Brisbane. Again, we bought it as a new property. And that, up until COVID, was faring a bit worse than the one in Victoria. The capital growth wasn't as great. The rent was about the same. The property value when we bought the two properties was pretty much the same. It just hadn't experienced the same sort of growth. But since COVID, those have absolutely flipped. The property in Queensland's capital growth has absolutely exploded. It feels like it's going up $5,000 a month. It's just insane at the moment. And rent has also exploded up there. So we're now getting maybe $200 a week more in Queensland than we are in Victoria for pretty much the same property, same size, etc. So the Queensland market has been much more buoyant since COVID than the Victorian one. And of course there's not these crazy taxes and clawbacks that the Queensland government is trying to get out of us compared to the Victorian market, or the Victorian government, sorry. So yeah, if I had my time over again, I'd have bought two properties in Queensland. Not that you would know that we were going to have a pandemic or that the Victorian government was going to spend crazy amounts of money through lockdowns, etc. And then try and claw it back from the very people that pay more tax than anybody else, because that's generally what investors do. They pay more tax than anybody else. So that got me to thinking, well, if we're going to sell the place in Victoria, because any sort of investment in Victoria at the moment from property point of view is a complete waste of time and money. And that's not what you invest for. You invest to make money, not to lose money or fill the government coffers. So I was thinking, where would I invest? Well, obviously not Victoria, so that's off. We have had houses in Perth before, and we lived in Perth for a while. The Perth market can be a bit fickle. It's very, very reliant on mining. So you can go through periods of really, really strong capital growth, and then you go through longer periods where there's not a lot of growth and it might even go backwards a little bit. And same with tenants, with the fly-in, fly-out type population, you can run into pockets of vacancy, and that's not always perfect. You know, 2 or 3 or 4 weeks of vacancy can ruin your return in a year on a rental property. So Perth probably isn't a market I would invest in. Tasmania is a solid market, but I see Tasmania as a market that is really designed for the long-term investor. And yeah, looking at me, I'm not someone who's going to be investing for the next 30 years. Any investment we make will be for an immediate or a 5 to 10 year return at the most. Tasmanian's capital growth is a little slower. So for me, in my position, that wouldn't be where I would invest. So that leaves New South Wales, Queensland and South Australia. New South Wales is harder to buy into the market. It's more expensive. Rental returns can be quite good. But I'm not sure I'd be able to afford to buy into the New South Wales market in an area that I would want to buy into. So because of that, it's probably not New South Wales, which leaves SA and Queensland. So South Australia, they're doing some good things over there. The market is quite strong, and capital growth is also quite strong. The rental market's really strong. The government seems to be in a good place over there. So South Australia is definitely a state I would look at investing in. And Queensland, obviously, we've had nothing but success. And good thing with Queensland is, while every month I think, wow, this capital growth has got to slow at some point, they've got the Olympics coming in 4 years, and the infrastructure that's being built up there is going to take a lot of people to do it. There's a lot of jobs being created. And I think for the next 4 or 5 years, the rental market will just get stronger and stronger. Rental vacancy rates are at an all-time low already, pretty much around Brisbane, and they are trying to encourage a lot of people to come up to Queensland to help them with their builds. So I think Queensland, in the immediate term, if we were to invest again today, it would be Queensland for me, or South Australia. It certainly wouldn't be Victoria, and I don't understand why this government has decided to penalise the very people, like I said, that probably are paying more tax than anybody else and are helping to build homes. I mean, investors generally, when we look at investment property, we're looking at a brand new house. We're not necessarily looking for a house to renovate or an established property, and there's all sorts of reasons for that, but mainly around tax. So what Victoria are trying to do is build a lot of houses, and they're bringing in a lot of immigrants, and a lot of those immigrants need to rent. So the houses get built, investors buy the house, they rent them to families or immigrants that are coming in or whoever it is, and then the government slaps these ridiculous taxes on the very people that they're trying to promote to buy these investment properties, and keep the big build, as they call it in Victoria, going. I just don't get it. Anyway, that's my chat for the day. Thanks for joining me on the walk. If you were to invest anywhere, I would look at South Australia and Queensland. And whatever you do, don't waste your money in Victoria. Cheers.